Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another 4 p.m. Bible study. My name is Jim Schaefer, and I share with you every Tuesday and Thursday at 4 p.m. We've been working our way through a series that I've entitled Divine Disruption. And in that series, we are looking at Christianity as a divine disruption to our world. Now, we mean that in the very best possible way. It disrupts the status quo, it disrupts how we think. It reminds us of God's presence. And we see this in so many aspects of the Christian life and the Christian doctrine. We saw it at the very beginning of creation. Lately, we've been focusing on Noah's flood, Noah and the ark. And I made the statement that I didn't think it was a divine disruption, it was a judgment that fell upon the earth. A divine disruption is meant to shake things up and to get people to move back towards God. Well, the flood didn't do that. The flood destroyed everything except for one family. Now, I did state that I believe the memory of the flood, the idea of the flood, to us today is a divine disruption. And we're going to be looking at some aspects of that here today. In particular, I want to look at the various flood stories that exist throughout the world. That's going to be our topic today. Let's take a quick look and see who may have joined us today. And if anybody is out there, perhaps you are watching after the fact on either YouTube or on my Facebook channel. No matter how you got here, I want to welcome you and thank you for being here today. Well, we've finally gotten a little bit of warm weather, and I don't know about you, but I'm enjoying that a great deal. I see that Charlene Herman is with us. Excuse me. Thank you, Charlene, for being here. Robin Sharkey is here, and my sister Audrey from Florida is here today. Hello, Audrey. It is nice to see you here. I see Jackie Snyder is also here, and I'm glad all of you are with us today. I know others will be joining us here as we move forward, but please take a minute to let me know that you're watching, whether it's on YouTube or whether it's here on Facebook. So today we're looking at this idea of, do the flood myths prove Noah's ark? Do the flood myths prove Noah's ark? Now, you may be thinking, well, what are flood myths? The term myth is used in place of a flood story or a flood account. You see, years ago, atheists and Bible skeptics, well, they refused to believe that the story of Noah's Ark was legitimate history. They considered it a myth or a fable or a story that was designed to warn mankind to either shape up or they were going to be shipped out. And one of the reasons that they gave, and I quote here, if the entire world was really populated by four Adam and Eve like couples upon exiting Noah's Ark, in other words, we had Noah and his wife, his three sons and their wives, so there's four couples that would be responsible for repopulating the earth. The argument by the atheist and those who doubted the Bible was that if the whole world was repopulated by those four couples, such a fact would be universally believed by all cultures on the face of the earth. So the argument was, if there is a common ancestry, then there must be a common story in all cultures. Well, that all was fine and well until researchers began to uncover flood myths in practically every civilization, every culture on the face of the earth. It all began in 1849 when a discovery was made of some tablets, and on those tablets, in fact, particularly in tablet 11, was the story that was referred to as the Epic of Gilgamesh. So we're going to look at that account today. We're going to see how similar it is to the story of Noah and the flood. And then we're going to look at a handful of other accounts throughout the world. The question I want to ask you is, how many flood myths do you think are in existence in the world today? That's your question. I want you to go ahead and indicate in the comments how many you think are here. I'll remind you of that as we are working our way around. So again, the question that I want you to do is, how many flood myths are in existence? All right? Indicate your guess below in the comments or in the chat feature. Now, let's go ahead and understand a little bit about this Epic of Gilgamesh. The Epic of Gilgamesh was found upon these scrolls, and it was in a Sumerian cuneiform some 700 years earlier than Noah's Ark. Now, this is one of the things that the skeptics love to point out. They like to say, well, the Bible, and this is what skeptics do today, now that there are flood stories all around the world, they've kind of changed their tactic. It isn't every civilization should have a story similar to Noah. It's that the Bible copied older flood accounts, like the Epic of Gilgamesh. Now, this is one of the things that bothers me, because while we do know that the source that they discovered was about 700 years earlier than Moses' account, all right? Moses was writing the account of the flood, but almost all Bible scholars believe that he took the story from other accounts that were written. In fact, most Bible scholars today believe there were 4 different accounts that Moses took and combined into the story of Genesis. Well, obviously, while they may have this one account that predates Moses' story, it certainly doesn't predate the story of the flood, because we know that it was written much before that. Moses didn't witness the flood himself. He's writing about ancient history. Well, suddenly we're faced with these flood myths or flood stories. And so we're going to look at how many of those are there. And in particular, I want to look at the Epic of Gilgamesh as our first flood myth. Now, during this study here, I'm going to encounter many very difficult to pronounce words, names, various gods and goddesses. I'll have you know I've done my best due diligence to come up with pronunciations, but if you want to make fun of me for the pronunciations, go right ahead. They're not perfect, but they're more than just a stab in the dark, all right? The story, the Epic of Gilgamesh, was about a man by the name of Pushtim, all right? Pushtim. And it is known as his story and the Babylonian flood. And it's that story that is told in this Epic of Gilgamesh. Now, Pushtim, much like the Noah in the Bible, is the survivor of a great flood. Now, the gods, according to the Epic of Gilgamesh, decided to send a flood to wipe out humanity due to their incessant noise and corruption. In other words, they were too loud. Now, here's one of the things that I want you to see. Here's one of the things that I want you to catch as we go through these various stories. I want you to ask yourself such questions as, which story is more reasonable? Which story makes sense? Which story is really fanciful and very much fable-ish, which story sounds the most legitimate? And I think you'll see as we go through these stories that really only the account of Noah and the ark make any sense. But I'll let you be the judge of that. So the people on earth were too noisy and were too corrupt. Again, we understand that that was part of the reason that God destroyed the world was because of the corruption, because man's heart was bent on evil. All right? So the gods decided to send a flood to wipe out humanity due to this noise and corruption. However, the god Ea warned Unapushtim in a dream to build a boat. And he called that boat the preserver of life. Now, the boat was made of solid timber to prevent the rays of the sun from shining in. It was 200 feet in length, it was 200 feet in width, and it was 200 feet in height. In other words, it was a great big cube. It was a great big box. Now, according to the Epic of Gilgamesh, it was built in 5 days. And it consisted of 7 floors, and each floor was divided into 9 different sections. Now, let's understand that a boat of this dimension, 200 feet long, 200 feet wide, 200 feet high, and built completely of wood, had they attempted to put anything inside of it and survive a flood, it would have bounced around in the waves like a beach ball. All right? No way would life ever survive such an ordeal. Everything on board would be utterly destroyed. But again, this is the Epic of Gilgamesh. Now, Unapushtim and his wife, relatives, animals, and provisions boarded the boat. So we see similarities again to the Noah story. The flood, however, lasted only 6 days and 7 nights. So it's 1 week. We've got a worldwide flood that's 1 week in length. All right. And after 12 days, it comes to rest upon Mount Nasir, which is located in Iraq. After waiting for the waters to recede, Unapushtim sent out a dove and later a swallow to find dry land. Unapushtim and his wife are both granted immortality from the gods for surviving this ordeal. So theoretically, they're still living today. If they would come forward, we could settle this dispute, but so far they haven't come forward. Now, as you can see, there are a number of similarities between Noah's account and the Epic of Gilgamesh. Both stories feature a judgment from God through a flood. Both feature a boat. Both have people on board and animals. Both boats come to rest on a mountain. In both accounts, birds are sent out to find dry land. The similarities between these two stories is striking. And yet, which one seems to be the most reasonable? In the Epic of Gilgamesh, the gods are disturbed by noise. It's like living in an apartment with noisy neighbors. All you can take, right? We see in Noah's description that God is judging evil, and God has him build an ark that is 400 feet long by 75 feet wide by 45 feet high. And by the way, modern ships are built with the same ratio that Noah's ark was built. It is believed that it would have been seaworthy and would have survived a flood. Now, Noah's ark took somewhere in the neighborhood of 75 to 100 years to build. I'm sure Noah had some help. Uh, I believe if you look at the biblical account, his father died 5 years before the flood. So his father would have been available to assist. And who by the name, his name was Lamech. And his grandfather was Methuselah, who was the oldest man who ever lived. And he died the year of the flood. I'm going to tell you something really fascinating about Methuselah in our next lesson. So just hold on to that idea for a few moments. Now, Noah, it took him 100 years. He had perhaps the help of his father and grandfather and his sons. All right. Um, Remember, in the Gilgamesh story, it only took 5 days. And at the end, they're still alive. So here's one story that I think is pretty striking in its similarities. Which came first? Well, I think any reasonable person would say the story that sounds the most realistic, the story that makes the most sense is the Noah account. It is more coherent, it is more logical, it is more consistent with what we know as to what would survive in the world today. Well, the second one that I want you to take a quick look at is the Aztec flood myth. Now, in the Aztec flood myth, this is going to occur in Mexico. According to Aztec mythology, 4 worlds existed prior to the present universe. These worlds were destroyed by a variety of catastrophes, and each time the human race was wiped out. So while we have a story of one of those in the Bible, according to Aztec mythology, it happened 4 times. And the 4th time, it ended through a gigantic flood that lasted for 52 years. Now, during this cataclysmic event, most of the inhabitants on Earth perished, but a few survivors managed to endure the deluge. Now, according to this Aztec myth, this flood occurred 4,800 years after creation. The world at this time, according to the myth, was populated by giants. The flood caused the race of giants to perish or to be somehow transformed into fish. So take that for what it is. Now, I think it's fascinating the similarities between this idea and the Genesis account and what we saw already in the book of Enoch and in the books of Jubilee. Giants, all right? And there is some reference to giants in the Genesis account in chapter 6. Take a look at it for yourself. Now, among the giants was one by the name of Exalhua, who was known as the architect, who later journeyed to Chula, which is located in Mexico. Now, in the Aztec flood story, there's a twist compared to Noah's Ark. The god, and here's where we come into some of these pronunciations, the god Titlacahuan, which means we are his slaves, warns a man by the name of Note. See the similarity to Noah? And his wife Nina of an impending flood. So what do? They hollow out a cypress tree, and Titlacahuan seals them inside, and he instructs them to eat only 1 ear of corn, maize, each. Now, unlike the Noah story, the flood lasted for 52 years. I don't know how they survived for 52 years in the hollow of a tree, but according to the myth, they did. And somehow that ear of corn nourished them that entire time. Now, unlike the Noah story, they don't get the chance to repopulate the world. Unfortunately, they were turned into dogs by another god by the name of Tezcatlipoca. Tezcatlipoca. You have to admit, I did that fairly well. Now, Tezcatlipoca was the god of the night or the god of sorcery, and his orders had been disobeyed, and so he made sure that the two, Note and Nina, were executed. Who repopulated the earth? We don't know. It wasn't them, that's for sure. A third story that I want you to be aware of is the story of Manu and the flood. Now, Manu is a Hindu individual. This takes place on the continent of India. And in this story, the main character's name is Manu Vivasvata. All right? And he is described as a virtuous individual. Now we know that Noah was referred to as a man of righteousness. And so we see a similarity right there. In fact, like Noah, Manu has three sons before the flood. Their names were Charma, Sharma, and Yapeti. And so we see this similarity. Again, how? Unless this is simply descendants of Noah, that the story has been passed down year after year after year and changed over the years. Now, according to this flood myth, when the flood comes, he ties the boat to a fish's horn. Oh, by the way, I didn't mention this, but Manu is warned by a fish to whom he had done a kindness that a great flood is going to come and destroy all of humanity. Manu follows the fish's advice and builds a boat. It has enough space for Manu, his daughter, a selection of animals, and 7 sages or 7 wise men that will assist him in surviving. Now, when the flood comes, he ties the boat to the fish's horn and is safely steered to a mountaintop where the boat comes to rest. And it's believed that that was in the Himalayas. Now, after the flood recedes, Manu, the sole human survivor, performs a sacrifice. We know, according to the biblical account, that Noah does the same thing. From the waters, however, a woman is born, announcing herself as the daughter of Manu. These two then become the ancestors of the human race to replenish the earth. Now, I'll be very honest with you, when I was doing this reading and this research, that confused me. Wasn't his daughter on the boat? How is it that she's reborn? Well, they're one and the same. So somehow he repopulates the earth with his daughter. All right. No description of the flood, no description of the boat are given. But again, you can see the similarities in this Indian version of Noah's Ark. And then we have the story of the Sumerian, and this is another Mesopotamian tale, and it has to do with a man by the name of Ziasudra. Now, Ziasudra, in this myth, the devastating flood is sent by the gods to once again destroy humanity. Again, this is thought to be laid earlier, closer to us, than the Epic of Gilgamesh. It has some similarities to it, but also some differences. Now, why God destroys the earth in this particular flood, we're not really sure. That part of the tablet, that section of writing was broken off and lost. But most scholars believe, based on the other ancient flood myths, that the gods were displeased with humanity. It's possible they were unhappy with human behavior. Most think it had something to do with the excessive noise, once again, or some form of wrongdoing. Another theory that's been proposed concerning this specific myth is that the gods felt that mankind had become too numerous and that was disrupting the natural order. So in this myth, Vyasudra is a righteous king. Again, very similar to Noah. Like Noah, Vyasudra is instructed to build a massive boat in order to survive the gods' wrathful flood. Vyasudra takes his family and animals aboard, and after the flood, they become the ancestors of humanity. Now, Enki, the water god, who disagreed with the rest of the gods concerning this plan, warns Vyasudra in a dream to build a boat and gives him the dimensions, though the description of the boat isn't available any longer. At any rate, we do know that the boat was large enough to house Vyasudra, I told you this would be tough, and his family and a variety of animals. So we see again another story very similar to Noah's flood. Remember the question that I asked at the outset? How many flood myths are there in existence? Well, I want you to go ahead and put your guess down in the comments. And while you do that, I want to share with you a handful of additional flood myths. I will tell you that there is a story from Hawaii, and it has to do with a man by the name of Nu, N-U-U, and a large boat to save his family from a flood. And when the boat landed safely on Manao Kai, Nanu offered a pig and coconuts to thank the moon. So the creator descends on a rainbow to reveal that he was the one who saved mankind. It's interesting that you have, again, a worldwide flood, you have survivors, you have sacrifices, and you've even got a rainbow in this account. And then there is a story from the American plains where giants were ruling the earth, and the giants had offended the creator. So Tirawa drowned them in a flood. He was the god at the time. Then he remade man and woman, who became the ancestors of the Pawnee people. Again, this is right from the American continent. Then there was an account from Peru. The creator, Viracocha, sent a flood to destroy the unruly giants he had made. Only 2 giants survived in a boat, which landed, and I'm not going to attempt to pronounce the city where it landed. The creator then made animals to fill the earth, and he made people from clay. In Canada, in the Hudson Bay area, there is a story. One of the gods became angry at the giants and decided to drown them in a flood, but he warned a man to build a large canoe. And the man sent out an otter who retrieved dirt from which man remade the earth. Again, you can see elements of the story. There's a Scandinavian legend or myth from Norway, Sweden, where Odin killed the first frost giant, and Ymir, his blood, deluged the earth. And the frost giant Bergelmir and his wife survived in a hollowed out tree. In Tanzania, Africa, the story is told of 2 men who take seeds and animals onto a boat so they could survive a mountain covering flood. These men sent out a dove and a hawk to see if the earth had dried up. And then you have another myth from Acadia, from the Middle East. Angry over human noise, the gods decide to flood the earth. But again, a boat is built in order for them to survive. In Western Australia, Jahara and his family survive a worldwide flood on a raft. He then sends out birds to see if the waters had receded. Pleased by the smell of cooking kangaroo, the god Nagaja placed a rainbow in the sky to stop the rain clouds. So again, even in Australia, you find a flood myth. And the final one I'll share with you is China. When a sky god flooded the earth, a brother and sister survived on a boat. They had a deformed child, which the brother cut into pieces, and the earth was repopulated from those pieces. So, what I want you to see is that there are flood myths from all around the world. Now, I don't think you're going to be able to see this, especially if you're looking at it with your phone. But this is a chart from Answers in Genesis. And by the way, Answers in Genesis is really a great site if you're looking for support for the idea of a creator God and of a literal interpretation of the Bible. I have posted this on Facebook as well, so you can enlarge it, but I wanted you to see it here as well. So, in conclusion, what I want you to gather is that there are flood myths from all around the world. According to James Perloff, he took a look at over 200 flood myths. He wrote that 95% of the 200 flood myths that he had looked at, 95% of them mention a global flood. 70% mention a boat. And 51% talk about survivors on a mountaintop. What I want you to see is that there are in every culture on the face of this earth a flood story, a flood myth, similar to the Noah account. How is this possible unless there is an individual source for all of those stories? I believe that the Noah story is true. And I believe that as Noah and his family exited the ark and began to repopulate the earth, do you remember what happens next in the Bible several hundred years later? There is a tower being built, the Tower of Babel, and God disrupts the language. By the way, that ought to give you a hint that we're getting ready to move into that as part of our divine disruption series. But the languages are confused and the people are scattered from one end of the earth to another. And they all take with them a remnant of the story of Noah and the ark. Now, Dr. Dwayne Gish from Answers in Genesis, he looked at over 270 flood accounts, right? There are other writers, and as I did additional research here, I found that some claim there are over 500 flood myths around the world. Why did these others not include them? Well, because some of them are so similar that they could be the same account. Some don't seem to refer to a global, worldwide flood, only a small area flood, and therefore they weren't of interest to the others. But there is over 500 different flood accounts throughout the world. But which of the stories provides us a coherent and logical and consistent story that is reasonable? God is not bothered by loud noises. God is not upset because there are too many people. God judges sin. He judges evil. As we read the Genesis account, men's hearts were filled with evil. In our next lesson, I want to talk to you a little bit about those giants. I'm going to talk about the sons of God and the daughters of men. Please help spread the word. I'm going to share with you my belief on that. I don't know that it's right, but I'll at least tell you what I think based on the research that I have done. But what I want you to see is that to the atheist, to the scoffers, it's not going to matter what kind of evidence we present. They refuse to believe in God. Therefore, they're going to discount any evidence that there is. I think the evidence is overwhelming that there is a single source of truth to all of these flood myths. Does it prove that Noah and the ark really existed? No, of course not. But it sure does make it likely, doesn't it? It sure does seem to indicate that there is an element of truth in those stories. So I hope you've enjoyed today. Let's take a quick look. I see a number of people. Gail has joined us. Hello, Gail, and others. I'm not able to get much further there, but thank you all for being here. In our next lesson on Thursday, I want to look at some aspects of Noah's flood that you may have never considered before. I want to tell you a little bit about Methuselah and what his name means and how it is figured into the story of the flood. We're going to talk about, did the flood really happen because of 40 days of rain? Seems like we've had that in the last 2 months here with no worldwide flooding. What really happened in Noah's day? We're going to look at that, and I think some of the things are going to be very surprising for you. If you would continue to pray for me, my doctor's appointment went well last week. My doctor said that my kidney numbers were a bit improved, so I'm grateful for that. I do have a stress test tomorrow, so the doctor's appointments continue, but hopefully I'll be ready to go on Thursday. Thank you for your prayers. Thank you for your attention. Don't forget to go to my YouTube channel. The address is there. Simply youtube.com/@JimSchaefer8933. And then if you want to add the /playlist, that'll give you all of the videos that are there. But I now have, I honestly don't remember, 80 videos, 70 videos, something like that. Go take a look, subscribe, and it'll alert you every time I post a new video. God bless you. I hope to see you all on Thursday.